Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. For the record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
For the record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is Monday, the 16th day of July 2018. I trust that everyone had an enjoyable weekend, that all of your activities that you engaged in were certainly enjoyable, fruitful, achieved the results that you wanted them to achieve as well. And it is now payback time also. Payback time for all of you World Cup fans. Those of you who snuck a little time here and there, who was watching it on your computer when you should have been doing work. Payback time now. Time for you to pay your employers back. Give back that time that you took off during the World Cup. I'm sure that employers were extremely generous in terms of allowing you time to watch the World Cup. And so it's time to pay back now. Varying degrees of sentiments towards the winners and the losers. I believe in the Cayman Islands you had a lot of English fans of England. Many wanted to see England lose as well. A good friend of mine wanted to see England lose simply because of what they did to Pelé. I think it was in 1968, somewhere around there, wherever, when they targeted the great legendary Pelé. So a lot of them wanted to see England lose. We had no African team in the finals, but we certainly had a lot of African players in the finals on the French team. And the composition of that French team and having so many Africans on it is not accidental at all. You constantly hear us talk about colonialism, and while I abhor any form of colonialism, be it neo-colonialism or the old colonialism, while I abhor that, at the same time, the composition of the French team speaks volumes in terms of France's policy of assimilation, the assimilation of its colonies and the people of those colonies into French culture, into the country of France as well. So while we didn't have an African team in there, we certainly had lots of Africans playing on there as well. So, but my main thrust is payback time. Pay back your employers. Give that time back that you took during the World Cup. Those of you, you know yourselves, you know exactly who you are, so just go ahead and do it. You don't have to admit anything at this point in time. Folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. Of course, you know For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. During that period, our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls, normally that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can join in the conversation by calling us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flow. That toll-free number, 1-800-534-8255. Put it on speed dial. Or you can call us on 949 6990 and 949 8047. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, you can email us at For The Record. That is one word, For The Record, at CANDW.KY. We also have a WhatsApp number. That WhatsApp number is 925-3261, where you can leave a voice note or send us a text message. If you leave a voice note, then the contents of that voice note will be played during the course of the show. We also have YouTube as well, and you can subscribe to Radio Cayman on YouTube by subscribing to Radio Cayman live stream. Radio Cayman live stream as well. And we welcome any and every opportunity to converse with you here on For The Record on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. This morning we're going to be talking about the legislative agenda for the Cayman Islands. Of course, the legislature's scheduled to resume in September. Before we go there, though, I just was looking at an article in the Turks and Caicos Sun, the Sun newspaper in the Turks and Caicos Islands. 13,000 persons on work permit. And that 13,000 number of 13,000 represents 41% of the country's population, and it is slightly more than the 12,239 Turks and Caicos Islanders who are living in the Turks and Caicos Islands as well. So the number of persons who are Turks and Caicos Islanders, 12,231, which is 39%. Haitians, 10,928, 34%. Other nationalities, 4.5%. And work permit holders, 13,000, representing 41% of the country's population. Does that sound familiar? Folks, it is my pleasure to have in the studio again with me this morning, coming quite often now.
Indeed.
None other than MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. Mr. Harris, good morning, sir. Welcome to For The Record. And have you recovered from World Cup fever?
Well, first of all, good morning to you, OC, and to your listeners this morning. A special good morning to those tuned in from the constituency of Prospect. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to sit with you and have a chit-chat about some of the good things that the government is doing on behalf of the citizens of the Cayman Islands. And yes, I am delighted to see that the World Cup is over, but in truth and fact, my World Cup ended when Brazil lost against Belgium.
Yes,
whilst everyone else was probably like I would have been had Brazil made it to the finals, watching every single game with bated breath, my World Cup ended when Belgium defeated Brazil.
Yes.
But certainly congratulations to France on a fantastic victory over Croatia yesterday. Was it 4-2, right?
4-2, yeah.
4-2.
Yeah.
Fantastic game. And certainly congratulations to the France. A lot of friends said, so who are you rooting for, France or Croatia? And I said, well, I really can't in good conscience root for France since they beat Brazil in 1998 for the World Cup title. So I was pretty much teamless. May the best man win, I said, and whoever wants it more will usually walk away with the title. Very clearly, that was France. But to France's credit, I mean, really, they have a rather deep bench. I mean, they had players that didn't play at all. Croatia, of course, on the other hand, didn't have that luxury, but certainly taking nothing away from either team for a stellar performance throughout the entire World Cup. And, well, let's just say I can't wait for another 4 years to come around.
Yes. Croatia did themselves proud, really.
Certainly they
did.
They did. So who did you have throughout the World Cup?
Well,
Watch them say France.
No, for my whole sentiments are centered around colonialism, politics,
Of course.
So first of all, I root against those countries that were colonial powers and
Indeed.
subjugated
Indeed.
people. I root against them.
As you should.
You know,
as you should.
The Dutch, for instance, I root against them because of their apartheid policy
Yes.
in South Africa.
That's right.
You heard me this morning speak kindly about France.
I did.
Because of their policy of assimilation. Yet
Yes.
I abhor the whole the whole concept of colonialism.
Indeed.
You know, as well. But I rooted for France simply because it had such a high percentage of African nationals playing, black people playing on their team.
Well,
And
that was-
I rooted for them as a result of that, despite the colonial aspect.
Well,
of
that
it.
was the running joke, wasn't it? There was only one African nation left in the World Cup, and that was France. Because the majority of their players, as you rightly pointed out, descended from Africa, either their parents or otherwise. Yeah, I agree with that. I have to agree with that. There was a great deal of those, though, in Government House that I don't know whether it was true pride and support or otherwise just sort of a forced reason to support. But there were a lot of English fans. And you know what? Take nothing away from the England team. They looked strong during the World Cup. I like their new lineup, obviously led by Kane, a true gentleman, both on and seemingly off the pitch.
Yes.
Incredibly talented, both front, middle, and even backfield. I think football certainly has stepped up a notch in the World Cup as that opportunity to see just how improved various teams have become. And yes, this coming from a diehard Brazil fan, it's encouraging to see some of the newer countries step up and attain the title. Obviously, showing that their development program is strong. But like many people, I'm glad the World Cup is over so we can get back down to other things, other priorities.
Yes.
The World Cup certainly did seem to dominate all of our minds and attentions.
Now, being such a big Brazilian fan, and we can understand why.
Yes.
Brazil always look pretty, but for some reason they get a little bit too pretty,
Yes.
and rather than shooting the ball,
Yes.
They try to end in such a flurry.
Yes. It was the biggest, well, next to Neymar, it was the biggest frustration of the entire World Cup, and you're exactly right. They love that beautiful game, as they call it, and they love the fancy footwork. But there were many times that, of course, you watch the game and you're shouting at the television, shoot, take a shot from outside the 18-yard box. I thought Coutinho, in my mind, from the Brazil squad, would have been, certainly the player of most of the matches because he was one of the few that would take a shot from outside the 18-yard box. Brazil had numerous opportunities but failed to capitalize on it. And again, don't get me started on Neymar. Again, even as a Brazilian fan, a strong wind or even a light wind would pass him by and he would fall on the ground and rolling and writhing in pain. And it's the part of the game that really annoys me. And I thought that perhaps with the instant replay, that perhaps he might have actually gotten carded once or twice for delaying the game, but that never actually happened. But needless to say, Neymar added a bit of comic relief to the World Cup to everyone who wasn't a Brazil fan, but only stress and frustration to the rest of us.
Okay. Now, I know we're going to talk about the legislative agenda.
Yes, sir.
And I couldn't help but yesterday morning, I'm almost certain that around about 4 o'clock, I heard the garbage trucks on Sunday morning.
Yes.
That is a good thing in a way if it was the garbage collectors out there. Bad in the sense that we've reached that critical point now where we have to get there. And so, at some point during the course of the show, if you have any information on the garbage situation,
I'll be happy to start off with that. Certainly, the garbage situation has been tenuous at best. It certainly has been frustrating to citizens in terms of keeping with the schedule. I think we will acknowledge that DEH has been rudderless for some time with challenges in their key executive, but I'm delighted to say that those problems hopefully will soon be behind us. I want to congratulate Mr. Richard Sims, who's been seconded over to DEH to help right that ship and put them on an even keel. One of the biggest complaints from residents has been maintaining the regularly scheduled garbage collection schedules. That has been behind schedule for a variety of reasons, whether it be equipment failures or manpower shortages or whatnot. And the reason why you would probably hear your dump truck or your garbage truck on a Sunday is their efforts to get caught up once again. Regrettably, there hasn't been a degree of consistency with garbage collection. And again, the government, the minister, has been working diligently to overcome some of those challenges. Undoubtedly, the complaints continue to rise. The longer garbage sits, not only is it unsightly, but it becomes an environmental hazard, as you know. And the government is working diligently to correct that problem. And again, Sunday was an example of that. But I am encouraged that the future, particularly the short term, there is an opportunity for some improvement. And again, a large part of that goes to their new leadership under, I think, the capable hands of Mr. Richard Sims. And I wish them well.
Yeah. Okay. Folks, we're going to take a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue with MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. We're going to be talking about the legislative agenda, but he will be talking about other topics as well, and we certainly welcome your calls with any questions that you may have. I already have a few emails that have been sent, and no doubt we will get some WhatsApp questions and comments later on as well. Mr. Harris, sorry, back to you.
All right. Again, certainly thank you, OC, for the pleasure of being here. Looking forward to today's discussion. Certainly the government had 3 whirlwind days in the Legislative Assembly now about 3 weeks ago, 36 hours in total. It was, I think we accomplished a great deal. There were amendments to over 12 significant laws. And those amendments served, I think, 2 purposes. Number one, first and foremost, behind any amendment, the goal is to improve the lives of the citizens of the Cayman Islands in some way or fashion. But the other purpose is to set the necessary foundations that will enable the government to achieve in some of their goals and objectives. And certainly, as you know, as of August 2017, when we unveiled the strategic policy statement, which highlighted 8 strategic goals and objectives of the Coalition Government of National Unity. One of those, of course, most significant is the goal of attaining zero unemployment amongst Caymanians by the end of our term. Many of the amendments, particular to the immigration law, sought to head us in that direction. This morning, though, I would like to touch, I think, on 2 key areas. One that I think is really important to members of the listening audience, particularly those with back tax or arrears in their vehicle registration. And the second would be to correct a statement that I made on this program in the weeks leading up to the latest Legislative Assembly meetings, specific to the amendments to the media-coined ghost Caymanians, yes, or in particular, those Caymanians who have the right to be Caymanian by entitlement. First, to the Traffic Amendment Bill 2018, significant amendments were made to this legislation. The law itself, I think, is, 1973 was when it was first implemented in the Cayman Islands. There have been some 16 revisions to the law over the years, but it's been over 7 years since the traffic law received a rather...
Oh, traffic, sorry.
Traffic, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Until it's been 7 years since it's had a real careful review. Yes. One of the things that we certainly reviewed first were the definitions specific to technology, which will allow for the use of things like cameras, electronic reading devices, and of course electronic tags, which is in relation to the new electronic vehicle registration system that is now in effect. But the other area key to your listening audience would be amendments to how the government recognizes back tax on vehicle registration. We talked about earlier on DEH and the garbage collection schedule. One of the other aspects that the government is certainly dealing with throughout all of the constituencies is trash in general, both roadside litter as well as some of the larger items being derelict vehicles. Mm-hmm. Now, I think there are two brackets of those persons who are in derelict vehicles. First of all, there's the lawbreakers, the ones that don't believe the law applies to them, so they basically do as they wish, when they wish, until somebody comes along and tells them they can't. We'll park those persons in one corner for a second and deal perhaps with the more, I think, the greater reality. Oftentimes, before a car becomes derelict, the reason behind it is that persons again, financial challenges are real, and they can happen to any of us. Someone finds themselves in financial difficulties, unable to pay the registration tax on their vehicle, so they let it sit. The following year comes along, they're still in the same situation, the car sits, and so on and so on and so forth. And two things happen. Either persons, upon reaching a certain point where their vehicle registration is now unattainable, they know they're not going to be able to pay it, they immediately put the vehicle up for sale. But they don't tell the buyer that there is a back tax. So there's a degree of fraud taking place at the point of sale. And I'm surprised there aren't more challenges in the legal system. Or maybe there are, and we just haven't heard them yet. But the other side of the coin is perhaps even more real, and that are persons who have gotten in arrears perhaps 3 years or more, and they just let the car sit and it starts to deteriorate. And after a while, it ends up on the side of the roads being scrapped for parts. And of course, it creates an eyesore, a problem, and requires even more work of DEH. Once the amendments to the traffic law are gazetted and approved in the Legislative Assembly, particularly signed off by His Excellency the government will be implementing an amnesty on all arrears vehicle registration. So persons who may be in arrears in their vehicle registration will have until the end of the year to come in to the Department of Vehicle and Driver's Licensing, turn in their plates, cancel their registration, and any back registration will be wiped clean. Once that vehicle is then roadworthy again, it can be relicensed as a new vehicle, and basically persons will have an opportunity to start over with a clean slate. We believe this debt forgiveness is not only timely, but is responsible, both in terms of considering the financial straits that many persons still find themselves in, but also a proactive measure to reduce the amount of derelict vehicles that ultimately government will be tasked with picking up, collecting anyway, but before that, having to deal with the frustration and complaints by citizens. So once the Traffic Amendment Bill 2018 is signed off by His Excellency the Governor, which we anticipate will be, I guess, towards the end of this month, but perhaps he may surprise us and do it earlier. I have every confidence that it will be signed off on. But then from that point, once the law is implemented, until the end of the year, there will be an amnesty for all vehicle owners who find themselves in a situation of arrears, back tax on their vehicle registration, turning in your plates, and you'll have those arrears washed clean.
Now, what about those vehicles that are still roadworthy and are on the roads, but persons are driving with expired registration?
That is a different matter altogether. The caveat here is that in order to benefit from the amnesty, you have to cancel your vehicle registration, and turn in your plates. And again, there's an assumption that there's something wrong with the vehicle. You do that. Once the vehicle is brought up to date, then certainly they can re-register the vehicle, get their new plates, and again, start brand new as if the vehicle was being registered for the first time. But we believe from our own records, and certainly the records of the DVDL, that there are a great many vehicles that are outstanding, and a simple drive-through in any constituency or neighborhood, you can see most of these cars in yards, some cases in yards, most of the time on the side of the road. And of course, you see them elsewhere scattered across the country. So we hope that this proactive measure will encourage vehicle owners to do the right thing and to take advantage of the opportunity to have that debt wiped clear.
This is a good opportunity for them to do that, especially those who innocently obtain another vehicle, have an old one, leave the plates on, not realizing that they're accumulating a debt to the government by not canceling those registrations as well. Folks, we're going to do a time check for our 8 o'clock news. When we return, we're going to open the phone lines as well, allow you to call in and pose any questions, any comments for MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. So don't change that dial. Listen to the most important news coming from Radio Cayman and then rejoin For the Record afterwards. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. We're talking about the Legislative Assembly's agenda for the upcoming sitting of the Legislative Assembly in September. Before we go back to Mr. Harris, we have two callers, and I have one email here as well that I want to read. And the writer of this has written before, and I really want to put this on the air now to see whether or not there's anyone from the NRA listening in that we can get some feedback about it, and we'll pass it on to Mr. Harris as well. Their concern is about when you're exiting King's Sports Center and that little slit in the divider there that allows cars coming from there to go straight across the road and to be able to merge with traffic coming from the east, heading west, coming from the east from Hurley's Grand Harbor, and then to approach the roundabout there. Crossing the road there becomes treacherous, and of course when they cross over, they present hazard to drivers as well if they're not observant and if they don't yield to traffic coming that way. And these writers, they're actually advocating that we close off that little entrance there so that traffic coming out of King's Sports Center will have to go east to the roundabout and come around, and if they're wanting to head west again. Because the whole idea is for the free flow of traffic, not necessarily to try to accommodate every business establishment and every individual on the road. And they keep hammering this home because they said that they, again, witnessed a near accident there on the weekend. They say that they plan on contacting Mr. Ed Jackson as well about it. I think while the government, while the NRA, is in the process of improving conditions in that area, they may want to look at that at the same time. I don't think that it requires any public consultation whatsoever in that regard.
I think to your point, you're absolutely right. The government has been discouraging that sort of activity, and whilst persons complain about the number of roundabouts, again, that's one of the benefits of the roundabout. If you're coming out of Kings, what should happen, and I agree with the writer, that you should turn left. And if you want to go back east, or west rather, then you drive west around the roundabout by Hurley's, you make the turnaround, and then you go back in the opposite direction. The roundabout isn't that far away, so it's not that much of an inconvenience. But certainly, to the caller's point, it saves the challenges of cutting across two lanes of traffic, which, again, to your point, delays the flow of traffic, and to the writer's point, creates an opportunity for accidents to happen as they do. Whilst certainly can't speak for Minister Hugh, who is responsible for the NRA, but I do believe that we have seen government trying to correct that action with newer roads that are being developed. And the reason I would imagine, and this is an assumption on my part, but I think it's a safe assumption, that little slit, if you will, that exit is there in the first place, comes directly from the businesses in the area who obviously lobbied their government members and ministers to include that. But that brings about inconsistency because just, a few hundred yards down the road, we used to have a gas station, Madak, who wanted likewise an exit coming from the east to west so persons can pull in. At the time, I think the minister was Arden McLean.
That's correct.
And he said, no, we're not going to do that because it interrupts the flow of traffic. The goal here with the new roads is to improve flow so that there's less traffic tie-ups both in the morning and the evenings, but generally all day long. And by putting these entries and exits on a major highway, it just does the opposite. It slows that traffic down, which is a situation of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You put the exit in to make the the business is happy, but you deal with the complaints on the back end when traffic ties up.
And it's not too much of an inconvenience just to have to drive,
It
and it makes you safer as a driver.
Of course it does. Of course it does. So it's a case of, there's a lot of wants and there's a lot of wishes, but we have to do that which is prudent. So I absolutely would agree with the writer, and what I will commit to that writer is I will, after the show is over, I will speak to Minister Hugh and see if we can get some degree of clarification on that as to what will happen going forward.
Thank you very much for that. We have we lost one caller. We hope that caller will call back. Two callers. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. Kokona.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Harris.
Good morning to you, sir.
I just called to say thanks to the Minister for Health, for the Environment Health, for collecting the garbage yesterday morning, and a big up to the guys that did the job, because they could have been resting, but they came and collected garbage and Butterfly Circle. So thanks to them, and thanks to John.
All right.
Okay.
Excellent. I will be sure to express to Minister Seymour your thanks if he's not listening this morning.
Thank you very much,
Have
caller.
a blessed and wonderful day. Bye-bye.
And you do the
too.
same, sir. Happy Monday.
Okay. Next caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, OC. Good morning, Councillor Harris. This is Billy Simamba.
Hey, morning, Billy.
Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for your call.
Thanks for taking it. Now, there are just two things I'd like to mention. First of all, is just to use your show to say that I have written a letter to the Premier, to the Governor, and to the Attorney General. And the purpose of writing is to ask them if they can give consideration to having some legislative changes in two areas. One is the time that it takes for court cases to be decided. I think I did call last week to this show, and I mentioned about how the Chief Justice has got a practice direction which says that cases must be heard and determined, or rather must be ruled upon. Once a judgment is reserved, it must be ruled upon within 2 to 3 months. I've got a matter which has been pending 2 years and 10 months.
Wow.
And I have now written to the Human Rights Commission, which doesn't want to do anything about it, but I'm still pursuing it. I've complained to the Judicial and Legal Services Commission about that, and up to now I haven't heard anything. I've been waiting 2 years and 10 months for a reserved ruling. It's not even the final ruling. It is a preliminary ruling, and the judge keeps giving excuses.
Justice delayed is justice denied.
Yes, exactly. Justice delayed is justice denied. And I won't get into the reasons for it, but she had promised actually that she was going to give it the ruling in the first quarter of 2016, because the case was heard in September 2015. And she did promise she was going to give it in the first quarter. It was never given, and she has just been giving excuses. But I won't get into that. But I think it needs to be looked at, especially that clearly the Chief Justice is not enforcing his practice direction. And secondly, also the Privy Council has told us that if you take 1 year to make decisions, that's too long. Secondly, I'll be very direct on this. The judge involved in this particular case is the same judge who was convicted of drunk driving. In my view, I would like to ask you, Mr. Harris, whether government has a policy regarding this matter. In my view, I'm drawing a connection between the conviction for drunk driving and the delay in my case. But that's my opinion, and I'm entitled to that opinion. But I might be wrong. I would like, I think, consideration be given to whether or not a drunk driving judge who is convicted on her own admission, especially in the spectacular circumstances that this lady was convicted, whether she should continue to serve as a judge. As a matter of policy, not whether or not the Chief Justice wants to keep her there. He wants to keep her there. But as a matter of policy from the politicians, is this something that needs to be legislatively addressed? Now,
But
that's my
Billy, would you have any concerns about the separation of powers if the government were to get involved in issues that really seem to be the preserve of the Chief Justice?
Not at all, OC, and I'm grateful that you've asked that. Judges are regulated by law. First of all, they are regulated by the Constitution. They can be removed from office for misconduct or misbehavior or incompetence, for cause. They can be removed. And therefore, they are regulated by law. If today government wanted to say, well, a judge who is convicted of any offense, whether it is drunk driving or not, should not continue to be a judge. That's a political decision which can be dealt with at a political level. But once the legislation is passed, then its implementation is, of course, for the Chief Justice. But otherwise, remember, at the end of the day, even the judiciary is regulated by the policies of the government ultimately. So there will be no problem there at all.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you very much, Billy, for that. One more call, Mr. Harris. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yes, hi. Good morning, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, Mr. Harris. How are you gentlemen doing today?
We're very well,
fine, thank
sir.
you.
Good morning to you, and hope all is well. I don't know if you're on the BRAC or if you're in Grand Cayman, but wherever you are, happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you. Coming live from Northeast Bay, Cayman Brac.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Now, in the United Kingdom, England, our mother country, for misdemeanors, the new law says that you have up until 28 days to prosecute the person. Failing that, you let them go for simple, petty crimes. Perhaps that's something we can follow suit. I'm very concerned, Mr. Harris, Mr. Moderator, that the price of gas keeps rising on Cayman Brac. You will recall that there was a group that was formed back in 2015, 2016, led by Mr. George Ebanks.
Yes.
For the BRAC, the representatives were Elvis McKeever and myself, Quincy Brown, and we did get the price of gas down. But now it's skyrocketed again. In some cases, the gas comes here first, then shipped to Grand Cayman. Why are they putting the prices so high? And perhaps the majority of backers are happy with the status quo. Tomorrow, it could be $10 a gallon. All right, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but no one seems to be complaining in an open space, just bickering under the mango tree that, oh, gas price is so high.
Yes.
$5.04 per gallon, that's too high.
Yeah.
All right, my next point, then I'll close off, is I want to find out, you see, with Brexit, in the next sitting of the Legislative Assembly, because the Youth Parliamentary Association, the youth parliamentarians, they've already debated it. Will our representatives be talking about Brexit, how it will affect us, and also with the issuance of new passports, because obviously Britain's passports will no longer say EU. It'll just be British passports. Will that affect us? Will we have Cayman Islands British passports, or will we all have British citizens and overseas territory citizens have British passports? That's what I want to find out. Congratulations on all the good work that you're doing, Mr. Harris, in this unity coalition government. Obviously, Mrs. Theresa May's government isn't doing so well as a coalition government. People resigning day after day. Goodbye.
Goodbye to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Quincy, on that last point. The good thing about the situation with Theresa May, and I predicted that her government wouldn't last, but then I've changed my view on that simply because no one wants the job at this point in time, not with Brexit. Right. So that's what makes her safe.
Yes, indeed. Thanks to all of the callers who called in and offered up their comments and opinions. Certainly I want to give an opportunity to try to answer as best as I can, both of them. We'll take the last caller first, obviously the initiative of increase in fuel prices on the BRAC. First of all, the government is aware of the most recent increase of fuel or gasoline prices in Cayman Brac. Happened about 3 weeks ago. We, as a matter of fact, immediately upon learning of the increase, we reached out to OFREG, the Office of Regulatory Services. That is, of course, the unified utility regulator, and made some inquiries. What we learned was that, particular to Cayman Brac, but also Grand Cayman as well, all of us, there have been actually 3 increases from the suppliers in recent months. The first 2 increases, the suppliers decided not to pass it on to the consumer as part of our goal of keeping prices at a reasonable marginal level, even though it is still considered very high in the Cayman Islands. We could have witnessed 3 separate price increases, but we did not. The suppliers, again, if you will, swallowed or accepted, absorbed is a better word, the first two increases and did not pass it on to consumers. The third, however, which was witnessed about 3 weeks ago, could not be absorbed and justified by the suppliers, and therefore part of that was passed on to the consumer.
How do we know that they didn't combine the previous two into the third one, and so we still ended up with it anyway?
Well, we know so from the information that is provided to the Chief Petroleum Inspector. Fuel prices are monitored very closely in the Cayman Islands and have been for some time. Obviously, we have not found that right balance to determine whether or not fuel prices and what consumers are charged here in the Cayman Islands is fair and equitable. Those discussions continue, but it is a very live conversation, and I can give that assurance to the listening audience. I know perhaps many people have sort of heard this yarn before, and I'll say yes, I'll agree with you. We've been promised and told that the government is going to look after fuel prices, but perhaps we haven't seen so much on the deliverable aspect of it. Certainly, we feel for the citizens of the Sister Islands, because one thing that impacts cost of living individually and most significantly, and is felt particularly in the Sister Islands, is an increase in fuel prices. An increase at the pumps means your prices go up across the board, and that causes us much concern. And I can say to the caller that both of his representatives, both the Honourable Minister Julian O'Connor-Connolly and the Deputy Premier, the Honourable Moses Kirkconnell, were particularly interested in this recent increase. They have been engaged with Ofreg, and the discussions are live and ongoing. We are aware of this increase. It is an incremental increase, but the good news is there could have been as many as 2 other increases that did not happen. They were absorbed by the suppliers. We're keeping a close eye on it. Obviously, fuel prices traditionally increase in the summer months, which is kind of the irony of things. Things are hotter, and as a result of that, fuel prices have increased, and that, of course, is a burden for everyone. The government is diligently working on what is done to control or to ensure fair and equitable fuel prices. I wish I could sit here and tell you that we've crossed that bridge and we found the solution for it, but we haven't. But we are still working on it. But I can assure the citizens of the Cayman Islands that whether it be the Chief Petroleum Inspector or the government itself, we are keeping a keen eye on each of these incremental increases. The discussions with the suppliers are live and ongoing, and wherever possible, we are encouraging those suppliers to minimize those increases because of the impact it has on cost of living.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Harris. We have to take a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue with MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. I'm going to throw the mic back over to Mr. Harris. I believe we still have Billy's question and concern.
First of all, thank you to Billy Samamba for his questions. Certainly look forward to receiving his letter. I won't see it because it wasn't written to me, but I'm sure we'll talk about it once it is received. As it relates to removing presiding judges or magistrates for what would otherwise be misdemeanor traffic offenses. Again, you pointed out the Constitution. There are 3 significant categories in the Constitution: the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. As Mr. Samamba pointed out, though, the legislative do write laws and policies that impact all of those, and certainly when they do impact the judiciary, there is a degree of consultation with the Chief Justice on that. So, so we maintain those separations. My personal opinion is that a judge or magistrate is the title they have when they go to work, but they're not on the clock 24 hours a day. They have, a right to private life. What they do in that private life is their business.
And they're humans.
And they're humans just like everyone else. And the recent instance of a magistrate being charged with DOI just proves it. That, again, they're human beings as well. I do not support removing a person from their job because of a mistake that they make in their private life. Obviously, depending on the seriousness of it. Certainly, if a judge goes out and murders somebody, that changes the conversation quite considerably. But do I think a DUI is a reason to remove a sitting magistrate? I do not. That's just my personal opinion. Other persons may share a different view. I also understand, though, the position upon which the caller comes from, because there is, having due respect for the position itself. In other words, you're holding persons accountable because of the high office onto which they hold, rather than making it personal about the individual or otherwise. And again, I also understand that argument, but it takes me back to a conversation and a call that I had on a previous radio show last week. They were complaining about the Standards in Public Life law, which was passed unanimously in the House, but still has not yet been implemented. Yes. And again, politicians are the ones who are getting the blame for it. But the reasons why it hasn't been implemented is that the Standards in Public Life law applies specific standards to any person holding public office, whether you're elected or you're doing your civic duty. You sit on boards or otherwise. And the reason for the delay isn't the politicians who are complaining about the high bar. It is private citizens who serve on boards that are being required to fulfill certain aspects of the Standards in Public Life bill, which they believe are excessive. And as a result of that, we're seeing less attractiveness, if you will. Persons are no longer accepting board appointments because of the requirements. So here's a case where, again, we set a bar. The elected members have no problem in meeting that bar, but because that bar applies to not just elected members, private citizens are saying this bar is too high. So again, to Mr. Sabama's point, I think it's extreme to say to a presiding judge or anyone that because you were charged with a DUI, you should lose your job because of it. It was a mistake. To err is human, and it happens to all of us. I don't believe the magistrate should lose her job for what would otherwise be defined as a misdemeanor under the law.
She's a judge.
A judge. Thank you. So but again, that's my opinion. Making changes to policy or law that impact the judiciary, whilst as a member of government is a responsibility for all of us, but really, I leave certain actions to those who've been there a bit longer than I have, and I take their guidance on that.
Okay. I don't think we have any calls, so we're going to continue with the conversation, Mr. Harris.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to shuffle back to the Immigration Amendment Bill 2018, and in particular to correct an answer that I gave a few weeks ago when we chatted on this program prior to the June sitting of the Legislative Assembly. It was an opportunity to chat about what's coming up. Now today I'm obviously chatting with you about the highlights of what happened in those 3 days of Legislative Assembly meetings. There were 5 separate amendments to the immigration law contained under the Immigration Amendment Bill, but one in particular was to address concerns relative to the media-coined phrase ghost Caymanians. And a few weeks prior to the start of the Legislative Assembly, I said on this show that what the government did was it allowed persons to apply for the right to be Caymanian by entitlement by the age of 24. And that was an incorrect statement, and I apologize for it. And the only thing in my defense is there have been so many changes to the immigration law over the years that it's quite difficult to follow, even for a legislator. But what the government did do in its, I think its 4th amendment to the Immigration Amendment Bill, was that it removed the upper age limit altogether. So now a person who is seeking the right to be Caymanian by entitlement, which that means a person who is born to a parent who's not Caymanian, but they had Caymanian status at the time of their birth. They were born here in the Cayman Islands, but they lost that right once they attained the age of 18. Prior to that, they were considered a dependent of their parents, and they were a minor. When they reached 18, they're recognized by law as an adult. And the previous law says that persons wanting to continue their right to be Caymanian by entitlement must apply after they've attained the age of 18, but before the age of 24, in order to be recognized. A great many persons, obviously, didn't know about this particular carve-out of the law, but when they did find out about it, they'd already passed the age of 24, so they were out of time. The government removed the age limit altogether. Now persons born of Cayman status parents may apply for their right to be Caymanian at any age, And the only carve-out is that they must be legally or ordinary resident in the Cayman Islands for at least 5 out of the 7 years prior to the date of the application. But now you can make that application at any age, and the age restriction has been removed. So hopefully that clarifies the mistake that I made, again, live here on your program, and I apologize for that.
Okay, and for the avoidance of any doubt, can you then clarify for a listening and viewing audience how that differs, for instance, from a person who was born outside of the Cayman Islands but has a parent who was born in the Cayman Islands and who are allowed to apply for Caymanian status, and there is no longer any, there was an amendment that was made that there was a point where you had to be resident in the islands, and that was removed as well.
That was removed as well.
So can you point out how that,
Sure.
The new amendment differs from what obtains for that individual?
Sure, absolutely. The amendment that took place in June was to address the right to be Caymanian by entitlement. What you're speaking of is the right to be Caymanian by right.
Yes.
And that is, of course, a child born of a Caymanian parent or Caymanian grandparent. All that child, upon reaching the age of 18, is required, or that now adult required to do, is provide proof that either a parent or grandparent were of Caymanian descent, make an application to the Cayman Status and Permanent Residence Board, and receive their right to be Caymanian by right. The carve-out is, as I understand it, those persons do not have to be legally an ordinary resident in the Cayman Islands for a period of 5 out of 7 years, like those who would otherwise have to be if they're applying for the right to be Caymanian by entitlement, and that is the significant difference.
Now, I noticed, because I have someone who is making an application now, and I noticed that police clearance certificates are still required. References are still required as well. We saw recent moves in the United Kingdom to remove all of these issues in relation to naturalization, because they feel that it is too onerous. There will be different views here in the Cayman Islands in relation to it. If you're a child of a born Caymanian parent or a grandparent, and if you have a criminal conviction in another jurisdiction, should that criminal conviction debar you from obtaining Caymanian status as of right, because you do have a parent or a grandparent?
Again, it's a question of the severity of the crime, in my opinion. There is a concern both of internal national security. We have to be cognizant of that. We have enough of our quote-unquote homegrown problems. It's an entirely different matter to import it or add to it. So we have to consider.
But that person has a parent who's
yes,
Caymanian.
but I was getting to that. So I mean, there is the challenge of minimizing risks to the general public, but also recognizing the right of that child or young or adult to be Caymanian. Certainly, as it addresses those children or adults born of a Caymanian parent or a Caymanian grandparent, they're entitled by right. It's their right. It's I don't want to say the word owed to them, but it is their right to have it. In terms of the crimes itself, I think it's a matter of discretion. It's a matter of finding the balance. But I don't believe, per se, again, I stand to be corrected, depending on the severity of the crime, that will stand in the way, that crime will stand in the way of that individual obtaining that right, because it is a right. What I will say in terms of the police clearance and the drivers and the reference letters, it is the way it is now, because we need to know, again, from a standpoint of national security, as well as minimizing the risk to the general public, who we are allowing to remain with us forever.
And I can understand then, in terms of your argument, the police clearance, but the references.
Yes. Again, as we see here with this whole right to be Caymanian by right to be Caymanian by entitlement, and the revisions to the immigration law, this is a very fluid situation. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the government at some future period sought to correct this imbalance again with another amendment to address these concerns. But at the moment, it is deemed appropriate in order to protect the otherwise broader general interest.
Okay, folks, we're going to take a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue with MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. Back to you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, sir. Just before leaving the Immigration Amendment Bill, so we corrected what we believe is the issue with Ghost Caymanians. The Third Amendment to the bill alters the eligibility period for specialist caregivers. We believe in order to provide some added relief to the elderly and disabled in need of specialist care. Again, this was a previous provision of the law that allowed specialist caregivers, persons who are tending to our elderly. In Cayman, we have two choices for our elderly who become sick. If you can afford it and you have the means, you keep them at home under specialized care. If you cannot, then you admit them to one of our residential facilities, the Pines or the otherwise. Science will tell you that a person's recovery and well-being is better achieved in comfortable and known surroundings, i.e. in their home. So wherever possible, you would seek to make that parent or grandparent comfortable at home. But you need someone to look after them. This enters the specialist caregiver, who is not a domestic, not a helper per se, but providing specialized care to the elderly or disabled. These persons, specialist caregivers in some cases, may be exempt from the term limit requirement here in the Cayman Islands based on the type of service in which they're providing. But the previous law stated that those persons who would otherwise be exempt must be employed as a specialist caregiver to a specific client for a minimum period of 3 years in order to be exempt from that term limit. We found, though, that there were a number of cases, again, where the specialist caregivers may have been employed for periods of a year or maybe just over a year. But they also were held in high regard by the families. They were supported by the medical staff, the doctors who were providing, obviously, medical care to the elderly and disabled. But they believed this intermediary third party served a purpose and was acting in the best interest of that individual. So the government felt that we should not take that privilege away from those families. Therefore, an amendment was made to enable exemption from the term limit in exceptional and extraordinary circumstances for persons who may be employed for periods of up to a minimum of 1 year with this individual. And again, this is done entirely looking out for the needs of the elderly and the disabled, and I believe works in conjunction with the previous administration's passing of the Older Persons Law, and of course our continuation and implementation of the Older Persons Council, which is seeking to obviously provide more specific rights to the elderly in our country, in our community. So this was a third amendment to the Immigration Amendment Bill, which I think is important.
Excellent. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Morning, O.C. Morning, Austin.
Morning.
Austin, been a long time I heard your voice.
Hope to make up for it, huh? But, you know.
I got two questions to ask you, but I need to get to you, Austin. How you feel now that you is the receiver?
Of the questions?
Yeah, people ask you the question before you was the man that asked.
Makes you more competent to answer them, right?
It's a different sensation altogether, and sometimes there's a bit of nervousness applied to it because it's easy to ask critical questions, but it's much more difficult to be expected to have the solutions to them. Sometimes you're able to answer the question. Other times, I've just learned from my previous life, if you don't know, don't pretend that you do know. Say that you don't know, but you will get back with the answer, and that's oftentimes been my guiding light.
If you qualify to get a passport already, you hold a passport in Cayman Island, why every time you go, you have to prove that where you got this passport? Can anyone answer you why every time you go to review a passport, and you got to prove if you get it by your grandparents, or you get it by your wife, or you get it by whatever? Why just every time you got proof? Can anybody answer me that question?
When you say prove, what do you mean? I mean, you have to resubmit the required documentation that you submitted when you originally obtained the passport?
Every time that, okay, I am based on my son.
Mm-hmm.
This is second passport.
Mm-hmm.
And now when he tried to get his passport for his children, he got his passport and everything. And they got proved now how you got your passport for your children to get passport. Now he had passport from time he was 12 years old, and now he's 28. Every time he go in now, he got fined everything that proved how he get his Cayman passport.
Yeah, because
anyone want to explain the reason why they always does that for?
Okay, hang in there, Mr. Harris.
Well, again, there is an assumption that persons who hold a Caymanian passport must be Caymanian, but that is not the case at all. The person holding a Cayman Islands passport simply acknowledges that this person is a British Overseas Territory citizen. The right to be Caymanian or Cayman status is an immigration status, not a nationality or a citizenship. And therefore, I think this is where the challenges come in for persons applying for a passport. You have to provide a birth certificate. You have to, prove that either a parent or a grandparent were Caymanian. The list goes on, and I don't have the criteria for a passport application right now before me. But I guess the simplest way of saying it is that a passport is not an identifier or an identity that says the holder of this document is a Caymanian, because that's simply not the case. And again, the term Caymanian, as uncomfortable as it may be, and I am a Caymanian as I say this, but a Caymanian is not nationality or citizenship. It is an immigration status, because we are not sovereign. We talked about this earlier on. We are a British Overseas Territory of the United Kingdom, but it is not necessarily giving you the definition that you are a Caymanian. The holder of a passport just simply means that you are a British Overseas Territory citizen. In terms of proving that, well, again, to the caller's point, is the son the child of a parent, of a Caymanian parent or a Caymanian grandparent? Are they a citizen of another British Overseas Territory? And if so, what are the requirements attached there too? Again, I apologize to the caller. I don't have the criteria for having a passport, but I believe they're well justified.
Well, the point is that his son's children, which would be his grandchildren,
Yes.
are now applying on the strength or on the basis of their father,
Yes.
which would be his gentleman's son, that he is a British Overseas Territory citizen.
Yes.
So he has to submit evidence that he is a British Overseas Territory citizen in order for the children to benefit and for them to be deemed as British Overseas Territory citizen and qualify
Sure.
for the passport. So you have to provide that documentation. Now, I think there's a valid question, a valid point, that if you have provided it once before, let's say he's provided it for a child once, and that child goes through the cycle of a 10-year passport, after those 10 years, should he really have to provide all of those original documentation again? I think that is a valid question.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that entirely, because it would be a safe assumption to say the authorities would have this information already on file. And again, I believe that these are some of the areas that will certainly be corrected when we look at this whole digital ID or move towards e-commerce, where, again, we're able to use technology to house this information one time and would otherwise remove the frustration or the annoyance of having to continually provide this information over and over again. I would agree with the caller that if that is the case, then certainly the authorities should have this information already on file. But likewise, I apply for a passport the first time. I'm applying to the passport office, who have also the ability to connect their system to the general registry. So why am I having to provide a copy of my birth certificate, which the passport office really, in theory, could access directly for themselves anyway? It's just a matter of the way things are done. I'm not saying the way things are done are the best way. Certainly there is a lot of room for improvement, and we believe that we will correct that imbalance as we get there. But it's just, unfortunately, we're not there yet.
Okay, we're going to headline news at 9 o'clock. Folks, please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back very shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris. We have one caller. I believe this caller may have rejoined us. Caller, good morning. Welcome back to For the Record.
Morning to me again, OC.
Yes.
But just want to say, my question is why every time that, because it happened to me too, every time that I get a passport, because I was born in Honduras, but all of my grandparents was in Cayman, I have to bring my proof every time to get a new passport. Why this you keep doing that proof all the time? You don't have a passport proving that you got all the, I don't know how you use it, all the rights to get a Cayman passport. And next year, my passport run out. And if I don't bring proof to show them, well, how I got a Cayman passport, why does that every time you must bring that proof to prove that you're a Caymanian?
We understand the point, and Mr. Harris addressed it, but I'll ask him to address it again.
Again, I acknowledge certainly that if you receive the passport, but it expires, and you got to go renew it. You provided the proof the first time, which gave you the first passport. Theoretically, that information should be on file by the passport office, so you shouldn't have to provide it again. And I would otherwise agree with you. I don't know why the requirement
it almost seems
is,
as if the system, they don't trust their own, trust their own system and the information that they have for some reason. Which is unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, and I certainly feel for the caller and other persons who find themselves, everyone who finds themselves in this situation, because again, it's an expense that does not need to be incurred by citizens if they have already, passed the bar the first time.
Yes.
If things have changed, if there's any new information, perhaps, having the requirement for those new information, for example, the application would say, has your immigration status changed in the last 10 years, etc. If answered yes, please state why and provide supporting evidence. I don't know why that is the way it is. It's certainly not the most efficient way to run a process of application. I believe that once we've sort of corrected the whole digital ID, the whole notion of e-commerce and being able to apply for services online and being able to have, whether it be a national identity that has all of the requisite information that is maintained on file so persons can do exactly that, renew their driver's license, renew their passport without the need to having to continually resupply this information. I accept that it is annoying and it is a frustrating situation. I don't know why the situation is the way it is. All I can say to you is that I will certainly, seek to not just the government certainly will seek to improve these situations so that, these inconveniences don't continue forever.
I think there's an opportunity to actually do that, Mr. Harris. I mentioned several weeks ago about the fact that there are amendments that are being put forward in the UK Parliament in relation to the British Nationality Act. And the way that I forget the terminology that is used, something about amending orders as opposed to bringing a bill forward. And they're looking specifically at one of the areas in relation to having to provide the references for naturalization and things of that nature. I'm not sure that politicians are au fait when it comes to the policies and procedures that the Home Office uses for processing applications. And they have said that they will consult with the overseas territories in this regard in relation to the amendments to the British Nationality Act. Maybe that gives us an opportunity
perhaps
when they make representations to the Cayman Islands in relation to comments on it, to look at the procedures, especially the fact now that everything is handled in the UK in
Yes.
relation to passports and all of this information that is being required over and over and
Indeed.
over again.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that they gave for repatriating the issuance of passports to the UK was their ability basically to quote unquote do it better.
Correct.
know?
I think that is also a very valid point that I didn't give due consideration to. What I can say to the caller is that I don't know right now why things are the way they are, in particular to your question. Again, I will commit myself to certainly finding the answer, but to the host's point, certainly the issue in terms of retaining documents may be a shortcoming for the Cayman Islands, but applying for a passport is no longer within our control. And to your point, perhaps the UK's system of record keeping might be better than ours, so perhaps there's a way to avoid this, particularly when it comes down to renewing of passports. But I thank the caller for his question, and it gives me some homework to come back and hopefully the opportunity to follow up with you, Mr.
Okay,
O.C.
we have a few more calls. Let's go to the phone line. 3 calls, actually. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Kosi.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
I am very thankful, highly blessed. Good morning, Mr. Harris.
Good morning to you, ma'am. Thank you for your call.
Yes, sir. I'm not going to release anything on the passport too much. It's just a matter that my Cayman passport has expired, and I do know what needs to be done for me to get it going to over to the UK and all that part there.
Mm-hmm.
But can you all explain to others that going through that same situation that they've been listening to just a while back now, what they need to have prepared for when they're going to be sending a passport over, getting a passport sent over to the UK? That is one issue. But now, Mr. Harris, I also need to say something now about and I'm going to leave my number for you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. About the cynical insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, listen good to this now. I'm not going to say it all now because I have been saying so much about it. It's coming out to me like a broken record.
Mm-hmm.
About the LA setting for those 3 days, I caught all of that replay on my Radio Cayman because that's all I listen to.
Yes, ma'am.
And then, okay, after the event, sunny day, that the finance committee came on,
Mm-hmm.
a lot was said then about cynical.
Yes.
Okay, right? But now I'm going to leave my number with Susan for you, sir.
Yes.
So I can talk to you concerning what I'm tired of putting over the air.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
And after I give you my name, you're gonna recognize me from way back 2002 when the Grammar Grand Pageant were on.
Okay. Okay.
that I got best in gown in 2002.
All right. I'm talking to a glamorous granny. All right. I look forward to it.
Okay. Thank you very much, caller.
Well, yes, I look forward to receiving that number. I'll check with Miss Susan afterwards, and certainly I'll give you a call as soon as I come off the air.
Okay, let's go to the next caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, O.C., and good morning, Mr. Austin Harris. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. Good morning to you, and thank you for your call.
Well, I am listening about the thing with the passport.
Mm-hmm.
It makes, I guess, one who has to go through that, it makes them feel like it's a temporary passport or something. It's not a permanent thing. I don't know why they do that, but I guess there's a reason. The thing I want to talk about this morning, Austin and O.C., is this off-reg thing that they got here. I would think 2 years ago they brought that in here. And this guy was going to turn everything around. I can't remember his name. But he was going to do all this. And all of a sudden, nothing has happened. But I see coming out the papers they had spent $244,000, something like that, on travel expenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had all this other money. I think it was $1 million something. I mean, there's got to be somebody or some group that scrutinizes these people when they come in. Now, he's leaving, I understand. His 18 months is up. So he's gone by his business. I guess he made enough money. What I'm saying is this. We have to get people in government who think. I mean, let me put it this way. I coined a phrase the other day. I said we have a tendency to put people get people in office because they have been there for donkey years. They can promote them into something and a position they don't know anything about. And I call that promoting them to their level of incompetence. That is not a derogatory thing I'm trying to say here. I'm saying that if you don't know, you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So find people that know what they're doing, at least have the aptitude to learn. But over the years, I've seen this. I mean, if we look at the number of people that were put on leave and pay, and they go on for years and nothing is done, and, a lot of these people are innocent in the fact. Why? Austin, you're an intelligent person. Don't see you guys are intelligent. We got to have answers to these kinds of things. That's what's destroying Cayman. We have to stop letting government, because it's government doing what we need to. Other countries, people protest these things. Mm-hmm. We sit here and we let it go, and then it washes away, and then the next one is. I mean, I said the other day, I think also you know this, that I called in about some $300 and something thousand back in 2015, I think it was, that they had spent on cleaning cameras on the roads. Now all of a sudden, we got some cameras that we can see what's happening on the road, but apparently there weren't any before that. But they had $300,000 to clean cameras. Now, what can I say, gentlemen? I'm really, really perturbed by this kind of thing, and unless we get good people like it, I think Austin, you'll do a good job. I think you and Brian and all them young guys going on there wants to do the right thing.
Thank you.
So
sir.
I'm leaving it to you guys to do what's right, because there's too many people suffering on this island to be able to waste that kind of money.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. No,
thank you very much, caller.
I take on board your comments, and I think they're all legitimate. Certainly, in defense of Ofreg, you will recall prior to the unification of all of our utility regulators, they each operated independently. For the ICT, for the telecoms sector, you had the ICTA. For the water sector, there was a separate sector. For electricity, there was the ERA. And the thinking of the previous administration was to unify all of the utility regulators using, I think it was the EY Project Future report that had a number of, I thought, excellent recommendations, which was commissioned during the time of austerity, and a means of which to ensure that the country does not find itself in another vicious debt spiral as it did 2007, 2008. So I agree with the principle of unifying the regulators as opposed to each of them operating independent. But again, I think OC will also, to a certain extent, concur whenever the government, whatever government it is, sets up a new department or a new authority, there are oftentimes funding issues that aren't considered perhaps at the point of that unification. Funding controls that were provided when these bodies were independent and autonomous, and then, of course, those aren't addressed when these services are unified. Certainly, I believe in large part the reason for the cost overruns comes down to a funding deficiency, not intentionally, but perhaps, again, another example of what happens when government creates a new department, perhaps, but does not spend the time considering how that funding for those departments will operate properly. On the issue of excessive travel, this is a point, though, that has been expressed to Ofreg, which is, I think, the irony of the situation. On the one hand, Ofreg says that, we weren't properly funded to meet the requirements and obligations that government has now placed on us. So you knew that you were short on funds, but you did not apply perhaps a more responsible approach to travel. You were still traveling as if you had your full budget. And that is simply, not acceptable. And Ofreg has been notified of this. I think they too will acknowledge that in some cases the travel expenditure was excessive. I don't believe that the trips taken by Ofreg were done on a whim. It certainly wasn't considered vacation. They were necessary trips. They were necessary to the business of Ofreg and that of the various regulatory sectors. But did we need to send 5 people when 2 people would have sufficed? is the argument. A better focus on the pocketbook, a better focus on terms of spending. These are discussions that are live and ongoing. I don't think anyone would disagree that regulation is necessary in the utilities realm. But all I can say in defense of the government is that we tried a different approach, which we believe in the long term will provide better efficiency and better value for money and cost savings. But as has been traditionally the case in every instance when you establish a new authority, you don't think of all of the you don't answer all of the questions, which is why when I look at what we're trying to do on the immigration side as far as work is concerned, which is the otherwise now named HR department, which is called WORC, W-O-R-C, which stands for Workforce Opportunities Residency Cayman. For the past 14 months since being in office, we've been actively engaged with thinking about all of the small moving parts. How will this department function? What are the various departments that are needed? What are some of the key positions, qualifications, and experience the directors need? What are the resources these departments will need in order to ensure its proper functioning? We've spent 14 months looking into this, studying this, examining this. We're going to have a soft launch of work in January 2019 with an official launch in July 2019. So it is an attempt to not make some of the mistakes that have occurred in the past.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Will we get it right every time? No, we won't. In many cases, this is a work in progress, and I think OFREG represents that work in progress. But if we do not learn from these mistakes that we seemingly repeatedly make, then there's a reason to complain and point fingers and demand better. But what I can assure the caller is I take on board his points. I think they're reasonable and logical points to be made, and I can only commit myself and our coalition government of national unity to doing it better the next time around.
Okay. We have one more caller. We're going to take a commercial break. When we return, we'll take that call. That will be our last call for the morning because we want to give Mr. Harris an opportunity for some wrap-up comments as well. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Caller, please hang in there. As soon as we return, we will take your call. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're going straight to the phone lines as promised. This will be our last call for the morning. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
So, I don't want to call back, but Austin mentioned about the license department. Thank the good Lord the license department got it right. Because every time you go and get your license, you just follow the form and that's it. Mm-hmm. You're not going to sit and do the steam test over and over. So I help thank the license department that they got it right. I hope the passport will start getting it right. So
yes.
I'm going to listen now.
All right, sir. Well, again, I think that's just further proof that, we have examples where that information, once provided the first time, need not be provided a second time. But I think, as Mr. O.C., the host, pointed out, the difference between applying for a renewal of a driver's license and applying for a renewal of a passport is the driver's license is within our control and in our hands, so we decide the outcome. The application for a passport is outside of our control because we don't control that process. Somebody else does. But also, as he pointed out, that was done that way because it was felt or assumed that the UK could do it better. Well, if that is the case, maybe they can do a better job of retaining these otherwise personal information so that persons like yourself don't have to keep providing it each and every time you go in to renew. But I thank you for your question. It presents a real-world circumstance that warrants, again, further discussion, and I will certainly, again, as I committed previously, I will follow up on this point to see whether or not, what I stated is correct, and if it isn't, then of course I will come back and correct that, or particularly what can be done in the future so that we can reduce the level of frustration that is applied to you and likely other persons like you.
Okay. Thank you very much, caller, for that. Mr. Harris, all yours.
Again, like I said, there were a number of amendments. I think one in particular, the Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018, is an important one to mention. The bill, which again is expected to come into law shortly once it has been signed off by His Excellency, will strengthen and modernize both the national security framework of the Cayman Islands, as well as strengthening our ongoing border control partnerships, both regionally and internationally. As you know, one of the ambitions of this administration is to separate the functions of immigration from labor and border control. The Advanced Passenger Information Bill seeks to address the border control aspect of the immigration and customs process. Not too long ago, there was in the media, I think last week as a matter of fact, a deportee that managed to come through the gates. And, the fact that he was deported from another jurisdiction was never caught up on. The reason for that is up until, again, 3 weeks ago, the Cayman Islands did not have the opportunity to access and or share in regional and international law enforcement databases. But under the Advanced Passenger Information Bill, and once the law is implemented, the Cayman Islands will have access to regional and international criminal databases of known offenders. And that will enable us to better protect the borders of the Cayman Islands, both the airport and the seaport, to, again, reduce the occurrences of persons perhaps slipping in that shouldn't. It will obviously allow arriving and departing passengers to be more robustly scrutinized, and the overall view will be of identifying persons who pose a risk to our country, and obviously either stopping them at the point of entry or refusing them access to flights or sea vessels that are otherwise coming into the Cayman Islands. Not only will this correct some of those issues, again, that we talked about from the headlines of just a week ago, but I also believe that as we continue to strengthen our partnerships, in particular with U.S. Border Control and Customs, we may very well be able to prove through our working relationship that the Cayman Islands can be trusted with this information, so that perhaps at some future period, as a result of this amendment and the operation of the laws that will follow from this amendment, maybe we can justify ourselves to U.S. Border Control and Homeland Security that visas, for example, can be applied for in the Cayman Islands as opposed to having to go to Jamaica. Maybe we can impress upon, our UK masters that because we now have the technology to access regional and international databases, because we have perhaps improved our identity and information collection services, that perhaps we can also be once again trusted to issue our own passports. But these are important first steps in working towards protecting our borders better, protecting our citizens better, but also, again, showing by example that the Cayman Islands are first world, and we can do it just as well as any other larger jurisdiction. But we have to get there, and we have to prove that. But we are working in that positive direction. Let's see, that's the Advanced Passenger, the Immigration Bill we talked about. The only two other aspects of the Immigration Amendment Bill, which we spoke of before, was the transferring of certain powers away from the Chief Immigration Officer to the Interim Director, things such as status, things such as permanent residence, things such as Caymanian status. We talked about those already. I won't need to go through that territory unless there's a specific question. We allowed for the creation of a separate appellate tribunal to deal with appeals for the refusal of asylum. That was the Fifth Amendment on the Immigration Amendment Bill. Previously, persons arriving to the Cayman Islands can apply for asylum by applying to the Chief Immigration Officer. Those that are granted, obviously, are considered asylum seekers or persons who are here successful in achieving asylum. Prior to the amendment, though, persons who were unsuccessful did not have an avenue or a recourse to appeal. So we felt that was a gap in the legislation that we corrected by this amendment. The Fifth Amendment now provides that a separate appellate body or an appeals tribunal will be established for the purposes of hearing refusals for the grant of asylum to give these individuals, again, a route for appeal.
And recently, we've seen in the news that there has been some agitation at the detention center in relation to those who have been waiting for,
Correct.
in some cases, over a year,
Correct.
for their applications to be decided. So this will provide some remedy for those as well, for those
Yes,
persons.
absolutely. I mean, there's a human rights component attached to it as well, which we have to be cognizant of. And again, we operate in that realm now, so we believe this amendment will also have a benefit to those persons. Okay. Going to our criminal procedure code, a number of amendments were made to the criminal procedure code. Perhaps the most noticeable one is providing provisions so that there is consistency in the procedures observed both in summary court and grand court to make it more equal. Probably one of the more significant changes, and we constantly hear about the backlog of the courts, the efficiency of the courts. Obviously, Mr. Samamba obviously gave a call earlier on identifying some of those deficiencies. Yes. In the cases of capital cases, murder and otherwise, those cases are normally heard in the grand court. But in the, the process of committing that murder, there may be a summary court matter, such as common assault, attached to that same crime. Prior to the amendment in June, persons charged with capital cases but having otherwise summary court issues would have to go to two different courts, two different trials, and have two different outcomes, which would obviously extend that person's not only legal costs, but otherwise time of the court. One of the amendments that came now deals with the issue of ensuring that for persons who are charged with capital offenses that are heard in grand court, but they have summary court convictions also attached to that charge, both of those charges may be answerable and sorted in grand court as opposed to having to go back to summary court. Yes. So now there's one trial and one outcome in one court as opposed to the redundancy factor. On the conditional release amendment bill, we provided the power to the board to reconsider a person who has been deemed to be released on temporary license. It just provides a further check and balance to that release on temporary license policy. Prior to that, once a person is approved, there was no recourse under law that would allow the board to reconsider that temporary release. We now provided that provision. Also, we answered the question specific to all types of crime. In particular, persons who are guilty of capital offenses such as murdering two or more people, persons who are accused of premeditation, abduction of a victim, whether there was sexual or sadistic conduct, the murder of a child. Those persons who are convicted on those offenses are required to serve their whole life tariff. What that basically means is life means life for these individuals who commit these crimes. There is no opportunity for parole. These persons will never be released on temporary license. They will be required to serve their entire term behind bars. Yes. And again, I think that speaks for itself. It's entirely meant to protect the safety of the public and to make the penalty fit the crime. What else was there? Significantly on the Music and Dancing Control Amendment Bill and the Liquor Licensing Amendment Bill, two of these amendments, first of all, had wide public consultation, whether it be with the Cayman Islands Tourism Association, the Department of Tourism, the Cayman Ministers Association, the National Drug Council, and of course the wider consultation with the wider public. Two issues. Number one, on the Music and Dancing Control Amendment Bill, we empowered the board to permit music and dancing on a Sunday where a New Year's falls on a Saturday, as we discovered last December. We recognize that we have music and dancing laws that recognize our Christian beliefs and principles. But at the same token, we are a tourism destination, and tourism and finance are the main cogs, if you will, in our economy. We're competing against other jurisdictions. So when we deny the opportunity to celebrate New Year's Eve because it falls on a Saturday, the following day is Sunday, we're restricting our business opportunity. And in last December, we received significant concern from both the Cayman Islands Tourism Association and the Department of Tourism. So rather than have that occurrence happen again, we've basically left the discretion in the board to decide on what are the hours relevant to celebrating New Year's Eve when New Year's Eve falls on a Saturday and the next day is a Sunday. And it was an economic decision. Likewise, so too with the liquor licensing amendment, which basically increases the power of the liquor licensing board to permit Sunday opening for licensed premises. I think what we will find in this is it's that whole Sunday trading issue all over again. I think we will find ourselves arriving at a point where we will enable businesses to operate on a Sunday for economic grounds because, it's attached to jobs. We want to arrive at zero unemployment for Caymanians, but we also want to encourage Caymanian businesses to create new jobs. But for them to create new jobs, there must be an opportunity for them to make a return. Yeah. It also has the economic factor of, again, the tourism industry. It's convenient to be able to buy alcohol on a Sunday. It's convenient to go shopping to buy a gallon of milk on a Sunday and other things. So I believe this is the first step towards addressing that otherwise challenging issue. But again, I state that these were decisions taken in full consultation with all of the stakeholders. So, no one was surprised by it, not least of which the Cayman Ministers Association, because they were involved in the decision making. This amendment was dealt with to address the more urgent matters, but there is a commitment to take a further review to look at things like how bartenders are trained, what are the rules associated with the advertising of alcohol, and obviously with the viewpoint of restricting that access to minors. So these were some of the more controversial but certainly outstanding matters that needed an answer, needed a decision. And whilst we acknowledge that there will be one subset of people that will be pleased with this decision, there will be an entirely another subset that won't be, and that's the balance that needs to be struck. But rather than leave these matters languishing unanswered for years, they had to be addressed, and we use this opportunity to do so.
Mr. Harris, I want to thank you again for making yourself available and for being so clear in your explanation of all of these legislative changes, as well as answering the questions from our listening and viewing audience as well. Folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. And although the World Cup is over with, there's still one called Le Grand Boulet. The Tour de France is taking place now as well. So there's still something for you to watch on there. Exciting bicycle race.
That's right up your alley, isn't it?
Right up my alley, yes.
And the premieres as well.
Yep. I want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want or even those who crave. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station. Join Sterling Drainey Banks at 12 noon for Talk Today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.
Did you know that planning permission is required for an addition, alteration, or any material change to your house? The 10% rule no longer exists. Did you know you should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required? Did you know that a deck more than 6 inches above finished grade requires planning permission? Did you know you should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required? Did you know that planning permission is required for an addition, alteration, or any material change to your house? The 10% rule no longer exists. Did you know you should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required? Did you know that planning permission is required for an addition, alteration, or any material change to your house? The 10% rule no longer exists. Did you know you should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required? Did you know your mailing address details on your land register must be up to date in order to receive notices on new development which may impact you? Visit Lands and Survey Department to check your mailing address is correct. Did you know that walls, fences located along the road require planning permission no matter the height? You should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required. Did you know that fences and walls within the high water setback require planning permission no matter the height? You should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required. Did you know that a trellis structure requires planning permission? You should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required. Did you know that a deck more than 6 inches above finished grade requires planning permission? Did you know you should check with the department as a planning and permit application may be required?
Wait for me, baby. Wait for my life. Wait for the pleasure.
Yeah. And so you want to do it again? Yeah. From there.
And you make me smile.
Yeah, I need a little more acoustic guitar. Doesn't Paul do the flute in it?
Yeah, Paul does flute.
Nice.
Every time.
Open invitation.
Oh, that's yeah. That's like a, I guess it says what it is. It's like sending a gift card out there going, hey, I'm free, I'm single, I'm free, come get me. It's something like that.
So I guess you were single when you were...
Yeah, okay, we'll go with it.
He's never single.
Someday I'm gonna find you. I wish upon a star. I don't know what you look like, but I know what you're like. Don't know who you are. You got an open invitation. You want me, an open reservation. Looking through my window, feeling passing by. You don't know how I need you, till you know how I want you. I'm all torn up inside. ship on a star. I don't know what you look like, but I know what you like. Don't know who you are.